Hi everyone! We just got back from our wedding last week. We got married on June 21st in Montana and we had a backyard micro wedding. We DIY'd so many things and we just had such a good time with our friends and family. I wouldn't change anything about the day. I had an amazing time. We planned the entire wedding ourselves and we did a lot of DIYs, so there was a ton of work and time and energy that went into it, but it was all worth it. And we had so much fun working on everything together, and I just really enjoyed the wedding planning process. So for today's video, I wanted to share a little bit of our wedding with you and talk about some of the planning and DIYs and everything I learned from the process. This is going to be a pretty chatty video, so go grab a cup of tea or a snack and let's get into it. When Alex and I first got engaged, we were considering having an elopement instead of a wedding because we liked kind of the laid-back vibe of an elopement. It's not a lot of pressure and it felt a little bit more like our style. But as we talked about it more, we realized that because we have family that live all over the US, that we didn't really have a lot of opportunities to bring everybody together from both sides of our families. So we decided to kind of meet in the middle between an elopement and a wedding and do a micro wedding at his family's house. We only had 40 guests at our wedding and they were just close family and friends. And at first we were a little nervous about having such a small wedding because I had never been to a micro wedding before. I wasn't sure what it would feel like, and we ended up being so glad that we made that decision because we still had that kind of intimate, casual feel of an elopement while still getting to have a lot of fun with our family and friends. So once we had the location and date and size of our wedding figured out, it was time to move along to inspiration. And this part was super easy for me because ever since I was young, I had one movie wedding in mind that was my dream wedding, and that was the wedding from Twilight Breaking Dawn. I absolutely love that wedding to this day. It's the prettiest wedding I've ever seen. The only issue is I recently saw a video on this or some sort of meme, and it said maturity is realizing that the Breaking Dawn wedding cost like $500,000 or something like that. It is a super, super expensive wedding to execute, but what we decided to do was just pull the things that we really loved the most about the wedding as inspiration. So one thing I loved was that hanging wisteria canopy, and we couldn't execute that obviously because it's a lot of work and a lot of money to create. So we decided to hang some wisteria from the ceiling in the tent to create a little bit of that Twilight aesthetic. And I loved the woodland fantasy feel of the Twilight wedding, and I'm such a huge fantasy nerd, so I had to pull inspiration from my favorite fantasy books and movies and TV shows. So for our color palette, we ended up going with mostly cream and green with little pops of soft purple and soft blue, and it was just a really pretty ethereal fantasy color palette. And I also found gorgeous inspiration on Pinterest from real weddings, and like I said before, whenever I'm looking at these gorgeous inspo pictures, even though I'm working with a limited budget and limited time and DIYing things myself, it's really great to be able to identify what is my favorite part of the image that I'm looking at and see how I can kind of recreate that on a smaller scale. And that's what we did throughout our entire wedding. It was all about kind of this creative problem solving to figure out how we could achieve a similar effect, but with the time and resources we had. So from the very beginning, we knew that we wanted to have an outdoor wedding. The only issue we were dealing with is that the weather in Montana, especially in June, can be very volatile. It'll be sunny one minute and then snowing the next. So we needed to have a backup plan in case the weather wasn't cooperating on our wedding day. We were really on the fence about whether or not to rent a tent because tent rentals are pretty expensive, and it was the biggest investment of our entire wedding. But we ended up just deciding to do it because we didn't have another backup plan. There wouldn't be enough room inside the house for the ceremony or the wedding if we didn't have the outdoor space. And I am so glad we got the tent because the entire week leading up to our wedding, it was 70 degrees and sunny, perfect weather. And then we woke up on our wedding day to cold, windy weather, and it was like that all day. And I literally don't know what we would have done without the tent. So logistically, what we ended up doing was we set up one side of the tent for the ceremony with chairs, and then we set up 2 large banquet tables inside the tent for the dinner reception. So we started the wedding with our ceremony in the tent, and then we had everybody move outside for cocktail hour. Originally, we were planning for everybody to stand outside on the lawn, but because it was raining, we had people grab snacks and drinks on the front porch and then head inside to the house to stay warm until the dinner hour. During the cocktail hour, we moved the chairs from the ceremony area to the banquet tables, and we set up a little sweetheart table by the arch, and all of that took, I think, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. It was really quick to switch everything over for the dinner reception. And then when it was finally time for dinner, we brought everybody back into the tent and we turned on the tent heater so that it was nice and warm in there, and the rest of the night was super comfortable inside the tent. So because we knew we were going to spend so much of our wedding inside the tent, we wanted to create that woodland fantasy vibe with decor and lighting. So with the help of our friends and family, we strung bistro lights all around the tent, and it looked so pretty, especially as the sun went down. It just created this warm, magical glow. We also got artificial wisteria and greenery garlands, in both from Amazon, and we wrapped them around the bistro lights, and they just looked really pretty and created that whimsical twilight kind of fantasy vibe. So the first DIY and decor related topic I wanted to cover is florals, because I think they made the most impact out of any other decor element at our wedding. Going into the wedding, I had kind of low expectations for how the flowers would turn out just because we were making them ourselves, but they ended up being one of my favorite DIYs. They were just so gorgeous. We ordered a lot of our flowers and greenery online from Flower Moxie, and the ferns that we got were really beautiful, really high quality and good condition. The filler and focal flowers that we got from them were okay, but not the best quality. They didn't seem super fresh, and there were several that just kind of turned brown and wilted once we got them delivered. So that was a little bit disappointing, but at the last minute, we ended up getting some flower buckets from a local flower farm called Bozeman Blossoms, and they were absolutely incredible. The owner, Alexis, blended all these buckets for us with our wedding colors, and there were poppies and ranunculus and delphiniums, just my absolute favorite flowers, and everything was incredibly high quality and fresh. So I would definitely recommend, if you are planning a wedding or any sort of big event, to contact your local flower farms, see what they have in season, and if they can make up some buckets for you in your colors, because I think the price and the quality is probably going to be way better than anything you can find online. So once we got all the flowers, we basically turned Alex's dad's garage into a flower shop. We set up big tables and we laid out all the flowers in buckets, and then we started making the arrangements. I was so incredibly lucky because a lot of the family and friends that we had at the wedding are wonderful with flowers. One of my best friends helped me make all of the table arrangements, and she did an amazing job, and she has a lot of experience with flowers. And then Alex's cousins were so sweet, and his cousin made me the most beautiful wedding bouquet. I cried when I saw it. It was just perfect. And it was really sweet because at one point I remember I looked around the garage and there were like 15 people helping out with all these different floral arrangements, like bud vases and table centerpieces. And it was just such a sweet moment that so many people were coming together to help us out. And it was a lot of fun and just a really great experience to arrange the flowers together. So for the florals, we made a bridal bouquet and bridesmaids bouquets, boutonnieres and bud vases and and table arrangements. We also made floral meadows, which are these large floral arrangements that we used along the aisle and the base of the arch, and those were a lot of fun to make. So let me know if you'd like a tutorial on how to make those. We had a lot of trial and error, but my friend and I figured out how to make them look really beautiful. So we used a lot of different flowers, which kind of created a wildflower vibe, and then we also used mostly ferns for our greenery, and together they had kind of a whimsical woodland aesthetic, and I love how they turned out. Another really meaningful DIY from our wedding day was the arch. So my dad had offered to build our wedding arch several months ago, and I was looking for inspiration on Pinterest, and I came across this really beautiful woodland wedding arch, and I believe this one is really big, like 10 to 12 feet, but I sent it to my dad and I was like, hey, do you think we could build a smaller version of this for the wedding? I feel like we're gonna have to make it much shorter, but let me know what you think, what's feasible. And the next day he texted me a picture of a nearly finished wedding arch. So as soon as I sent that inspo pic, he ran out and started working on the arch, which was so sweet. And then we picked out a stain color together, and I went to Michael's and got some flower and fern garlands to wrap around the arch. We ended up using a staple gun actually to just staple them to the front of the arch, and my sister and dad set that up on our wedding day. It was super sweet of them and it turned out really beautifully. And then for the hanging wisteria garlands that were under the arch, Alex and I got some silk wisteria garlands from Amazon, and we actually took them apart and restrung them because they were really thick when they came in, and we wanted it to have a little bit more of this natural woodland vibe where it was a little bit more sparse. So we made different garlands that had different thicknesses of the wisteria, and we really love how it turned out. I think it has a really whimsical look to it, and I'm really glad we made a bigger arch and put a lot of time into decorating it, because since the weather was so bad, we had to have our ceremony inside the tent with all of the tent walls down, so the arch became a really pretty focal point throughout the evening, and it was just really pretty in the background. I DIY'd our wedding welcome sign and our drink table sign. I just did some hand lettering, and then I used gouache and colored pencil to decorate around the edges, and I thought they looked really cute, especially in the gold frames. I wanted them to kind of line up with the stationery that we used for our wedding invite, so I thought this looked really cute together. I also made a moss escort card frame. This was a really fun DIY that I shared on my Patreon, and I love how it turned out. It really had a fantasy woodland vibe. For the tables, I mentioned earlier that we chose to do banquet tables. We both loved the look and feel of banquets, especially for a family wedding. They just have a really warm, inviting, communal feel, and I also loved the fantasy element of that as well, because you see banquets all the time in movies like Lord of the Rings, and they're in a lot of fantasy books, so that was really fun to incorporate as well. We used cheesecloth table runners and napkins because not only were they affordable, but they had this really nice lightweight feel and look to them that we really liked. And we also thrifted a lot of vases and got some mason jars and bud vases off of Amazon to create that kind of vintage mismatched look. And then we also got votive candles and candlesticks for the tables. And one of my favorite things about the table settings were these plastic crystal goblets. I always prefer plastic whenever I'm doing any sort of outdoor dining or entertaining, just because of the safety hazard of broken glass. And we had kids at our wedding as well, so we just wanted to make sure we were really safe. And we thought they had such a pretty vintage look. I love clothing and fashion so much, so I really enjoyed the process of going wedding dress shopping and getting to try on a bunch of different dresses. It was really interesting because there were styles that I thought that I would like going into dress shopping, and then after trying them on, there were other styles that I liked more, and I ended up getting my dress from a secondhand bridal shop. I loved so many things about the dress, and when I tried it on, I knew I wanted to make some alterations to it to to really make it my vision, and I'm really glad I got to customize the dress. So I went to a seamstress for standard alterations just to make sure it fit really well, and I also knew that I wanted to wear cape sleeves instead of a traditional veil. So I ended up making an alteration to the dress myself to make it convertible so that I could add cape sleeves for the ceremony and then remove them for the reception. So everything worked out, and I'm so glad I got to customize the dress and make it my own and really make it my dream dress. Alex and I also worked together to make my earrings and necklace, and that was a really special, meaningful project for me, and it was just wonderful that I got to wear something that he helped make on my wedding day, and now I have these beautiful keepsakes that remind me of our wedding. So I wanted to wrap up this video by sharing some of the lessons I learned. Even though I absolutely loved the planning process, there were points that were really stressful and emotional, and that's super, super normal. And I'm hoping that I can share a little bit of wisdom with you, especially if you are currently planning a wedding and maybe going through a little bit of that stress right now. Something I heard really early in the planning process that helped me was to try to identify which traditions resonated with me and my partner, or if there were new traditions that we would like to have at our wedding. And I think this is different for everyone because we all have different cultural traditions around weddings that we might feel like we have to follow or we might not want to follow. I would just like to encourage you, if you are able, to really kind of look at all the traditions that might be expected of you and see which ones resonate with you and which don't, and if there are any new traditions that you'd like to incorporate in your wedding instead. Figure out what matters most to you and your partner early on and focus your time and energy and budget on that, because you can't care about everything. This is something that I learned pretty early on into the process because I'm very detail oriented and I was starting to drive myself crazy. I was just trying to compare too many things and getting super overwhelmed, and I had to get to a point where I was like, I don't really care about this as much as I care about other things, and so it doesn't matter. And I think that's really important for your mental health and your sanity throughout the planning process. Just try to focus on what matters most to you. This next one is from Jamie Wolfer. She is a wedding planner and she makes a lot of YouTube videos on planning that are really wonderful resources. And something she said is that the most important things to your guests will be climate control, so just making sure that they aren't too hot or too cold, being mindful of that while planning, making sure that there is enough water and drinks for everyone at your wedding just so that they stay hydrated and comfortable, and finally food, just making sure that there is enough food for everyone, especially if you're having them gather at your wedding for a few hours. You just want to make sure that people aren't getting too hungry. And those are kind of the basic things that guests need to have a good time. They will entertain themselves, they will talk amongst themselves, and that was really reassuring for me to hear, because I think it's super normal to be worried that your guests will be bored at your wedding or that they need more entertainment, but Jamie was really reassuring that you just need those kind of basic needs to be met for your guests to be comfortable and have a good time. Another thing I learned is that people are unfortunately very, very opinionated about weddings. And this is something I've talked to friends about. This is something I've heard other people speak about. A lot of the time people don't understand what kind of things you are working with, the budget that you're working with, or the difficult choices that you have to make going into a wedding. It's just really frustrating and honestly kind of annoying to have so many different people's opinions and comments kind of coming at you around your wedding. And I think it's just a really normal part of it. Unfortunately, there will be people who don't like the choices you've made for your wedding, and that is totally fine. They can have their own wedding and make their own choices for their decor and all of those things. So just don't let that judgment or any mean comments get to you. Just trust your gut and do what you want to do. Another thing I learned is that it is completely normal to be anxious leading up to your wedding. Wedding planning is not all sunshine and rainbows. It is very stressful. There is a lot of logistical thinking that goes into it. We have a lot of narratives in our culture about weddings needing to be the best day of your life and everything has to be perfect, and wedding planning should just be the most joyful time in your life. And even though It is a really joyful time in your life. It's also extremely stressful. There are lots of decisions to be made, and we all have different backgrounds as well in terms of finances, in terms of the support that we have, and even things like past experiences, or maybe, not having parents or loved ones around for your wedding. There are just so many emotional things that can go into wedding planning, and I think it's really important to be kind and understanding to ourselves and to others. It really helped me to talk to some of my friends who are married, who reassured me that it was really stressful for them as well, and that they felt really anxious and were second guessing themselves leading up to their wedding, and they still had a wonderful wedding day and were so happy with the decisions that they made in the end. And I feel that way now as well. Your wedding should be about what matters most to you and your partner. If you want to have a really big celebration with all the people you love, you should make it about that. If it's more your style to go to the courthouse and have it just be the two of you, then you should make it about that. I think all relationships are different, and so all weddings are different because they are a reflection of that, and I think that's something really beautiful that should be celebrated. Another thing that really helped me was letting go of this idea that my wedding has to be the best day of my life. That is a lot of pressure to put on one day, especially when there are things that can go wrong that are really out of your control. I like to think that there will be many more wonderful, beautiful days ahead for me and Alex and our friends and family. It doesn't all have to fall on this one perfect day, and letting go of that expectation going into it really helped me enjoy the day more and be more present in the moment. So everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I'm thinking of creating a few videos where I can share tutorials and DIYs from the wedding, things like how I made the flowers and how we set up the grazing table and charcuterie. So let me know if that's something you're interested in as well. Thank you so much for watching, friends. We'll see you next time.